To call Michigan a lake is a profound understatement. It is an unpredictable inland sea holding a vast, silent graveyard of over 10,000 ships within its depths. In 1875, the Rosabel, a 100-foot vessel, was found capsized and drifting. Her hull was intact, and the skies were clear, yet all 10 souls on board had simply erased from existence. Science struggles with explanations, but the ancient legends of the Anishinaabe speak of something far more predatory. Mishipeshu, the great water panther, lurking beneath the 9,000-year-old stone structures hidden on the lake bed. What truly stirs beneath the boiling surface of these treacherous waters? Is it a nautical fluke or an ancient guardian demanding its due? Today, I invite you to stay with me until the very end as we peel back the layers of history and hauntings to uncover the terrifying truth that the deep is still trying to hide. Shall we begin our journey? Standing on the shores of Lake Michigan, one might see a vast blue horizon, a bustling commercial resource, or a scenic backdrop for a summer vacation. However, if you listen to the whispers of the past, if you look beneath the churning white-capped waves, you will find a horror more ancient than the very nations built upon these shores. For the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, the tragedies we often dismiss actually have a name that is far darker and much more tangible. Mishipeshu, the Water Panther, the great underworld guardian, the horned serpent of the deep. But do not let the name Panther deceive you into thinking of a mere predator of the woods. Mishipeshu is no simple beast. He is a grotesque, magnificent chimera of the elements, a physical manifestation of the lake's lethal unpredictability. Imagine, if you will, a creature with the powerful, muscular body of a feline, but armored in shimmering, impenetrable scales of pure copper that catch the dim, filtered light of the lunar surface. From his head sprout the massive, imposing horns of a bull or a great elk, horns that do not just signify physical strength, but a terrifying, absolute spiritual authority over the abyss. And then there is the tail, a massive serpentine appendage, long and rigid like a dragon's spine, capable of lashing the water into a frothing, murderous fury. When the lake suddenly boils without warning, when a rogue wave rises from a dead calm surface to flip a massive vessel like the Rosabel as if it were a child's toy, the legends tell us it is not the wind. It is the rhythmic, vengeful whip of that copper-scaled tail. It is a signal that the master of the great below is disturbed. In the sacred cosmology of the Anishinaabe, our world exists in a precarious, razor-thin balance between two warring titans. In the great above, in the realm of clouds and sun, we have the thunderbirds. They are the masters of the sky, the bringers of light, the enforcers of order, and the ancient protectors of humanity. They strike with bolts of fire to keep the world in balance. But in the great below, in the lightless, crushing caverns of Lake Michigan's floor, reigns Mishipeshu. He is the avatar of chaos. He is the lord of the shadows, the architect of the lake's most violent whims, and the keeper of the hidden gates. These two forces are locked in an eternal cosmic struggle. When you stand on the shoreline and witness a violent Great Lakes storm, the sky cracking with electric fire and the waves crashing against the cliffs with suicidal force, you are not just watching a weather pattern. You are witnessing a war between the sky and the sea. The thunderbirds strike from above, trying to keep the chaos of the deep contained within its watery prison, while Mishipeshu surges from the depths, trying to pull the world of the living down into his cold, watery darkness. Every shipwreck, every missing sailor is a casualty in this invisible war. But why the Rosabel? Why the Griffin? Why do some ships vanish while others pass in peace? The answer lies in what the tribes call the sacred metal. Lake Michigan and Lake Superior are home to some of the largest natural copper deposits on the planet. To the indigenous peoples, this copper was not merely a mineral or a resource for trade. It was the blood of Mishipeshu himself. It was his sacred, untouchable property. The legends are terrifyingly clear. Mishipeshu is the jealous, murderous guardian of the deep's treasures. Any traveler who dared to cross his waters without offering a tribute, perhaps a handful of sacred tobacco, a prayer of deep respect, or a token of recognition, was seen not as a sailor but as a thief, trespassing in a god's treasury. In 1875, a warm August morning that should have been forgotten by history instead became the cornerstone of the ultimate strangeness on Lake Michigan. The Rosabel, a 100-foot schooner, was discovered drifting just 40 miles off the coast of Milwaukee. But as the rescue teams approached, the sight that met them was chilling. The Rosabel was completely upside down. When they righted the ship, expecting to find a battered hull or signs of a violent struggle with the elements, they found nothing. The ship was virtually undamaged. The lumber supplies it had set out with were still securely on board. The weather had been clear. There was no trace of a collision, no record of a storm. And yet, all 10 men who had set sail across the lake were gone. It was as if they had been plucked from the deck by an invisible hand. The Coast Guard was baffled. The theories of collisions or sudden squalls were quickly disputed by the pristine condition of the wood. The Rosabel was towed back, repaired, and put back into service, as if the lake had finished its business with that particular crew. But the lake has a long memory. Nearly 50 years later, on October 30th, 1921, the Rosabel would once again become the center of a nightmare. Captain Ed Johnson, a man seasoned by the temperamental nature of the Great Lakes, awoke in a cold sweat. He had experienced a premonition, a dream so terrifying and so vivid that it shook the very foundations of his courage. He saw a terrible end for the Rosabel. This wasn't the jittery nerves of a novice. This was a warning from the deep. Johnson refused to step foot on the vessel the following day. He stayed behind, watching as the ship sailed into the horizon. And exactly as his dream foretold, the Rosabel was found yet again, floating upside down. This time there was damage, but no other ship was ever found and no collision was ever reported. Once more, in an eerily familiar echo of 1875, the crew had vanished. Was it a plausible nautical coincidence? Or was it the Water Panther returning to finish a debt that had been pending for half a century? But to find the origin of this curse, we have to travel back even further, to the very first ship to fall prey to the lake's hunger, the Griffin. Weighing 45 tons and constructed in Lake Erie in 1679. The Griffin was a symbol of European ambition. In August of that year, she loaded up with precious furs in Green Bay and set sail for Niagara. She never arrived. No trace of the ship or her crew was ever found by official search parties. But the oral histories tell a different story. Reports emerged of a lighthouse keeper who discovered a group of skeletons huddled together in a remote cave. Remains he believed belonged to the lost crew of the Griffin. The most haunting detail, however, is the warning. It is said that a group of Native Americans encountered the crew before they departed. They warned the captain that they were heading directly into a particularly nasty storm. A storm they believed was the physical manifestation of the lake's wrath. The captain, fueled by arrogance and a refusal to respect the spirits of this inland sea, ignored the tribe's warnings and sailed into the gray. He didn't just sail into a storm, he sailed into a myth. Centuries later, sailors still report seeing a ship matching the Griffin's description, silently gliding across the water at night, only to vanish the moment they attempt to approach. The Griffin was the first, but she was far from the last. Consider the tragic fate of the Chicora in 1895, a 217-foot wooden steamer. She was a giant of her time. When she went missing, only fragments of wreckage and a few heart-wrenching messages and bottles washed ashore. But the true story of the Chicora lies in the omens that preceded her disappearance. Much like the captain of the Rosabel, those on board felt the weight of a coming disaster. The ship's clerk, James R. Clark, had been with a friend who shot a duck. The bird didn't fall into the water, it landed directly on the ship. To a modern mind, this is mere superstition. But to those who live by the laws of the water, this was a profound insult to the natural order. In the domain of Mishipeshu, every creature, from the smallest fish to the birds of the air, falls under his shadow. To kill a creature and have it land upon your vessel was seen as an act that invited bad luck, or perhaps an act that signaled the panther's attention was now fixed upon you. Was the death of that duck the catalyst for the Chicora's end? Today, the Chicora is added to the list of phantom ships, seen silently moving through the fog, a wooden ghost tethered to the lake by an ancient mistake. These stories, the Rosabel, the Griffin, the Chicora, are not just entries in a maritime logbook. They are threads in a much larger tapestry of high strangeness. They represent a pattern of disappearances where the common denominator isn't just bad weather or human error, but a total erasure of life. When the engines fail, when the fog rolls in, and when the radar shows nothing but an empty expanse, we have to ask ourselves, who are we really sharing these waters with? Stay with me, for the Swang Mu is only getting thicker, and the secrets are about to become even more personal. In those stories, the entire crew went missing on the waters of Lake Michigan, but some of the stranger accounts speak of the disappearance of individuals. There are two examples of missing ship captains that remain among the most baffling mysteries in maritime history. On April 28, 1937, Captain George R. Donner was leading the freighter O. M. McFarland across the northern waters of Lake Michigan. It was just after 10 p.m. that night when Captain Donner told his second mate he was going to his quarters to get some rest. He asked to be awakened when they were close to Port Washington, which he anticipated they would reach within about 3 hours. As the ship cut through the icy spring waters, the second mate heard the captain move into the room next door. He claimed he thought he heard the rustling of paperwork, assuming the captain was preparing for their arrival in port later that night. 3 hours later, the second mate knocked on the captain's door. There was no answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Silence. When he attempted to open the door, he found it was locked from the inside. He He rushed to get the master key and returned to find something that defied explanation. The room was empty. The crew searched every inch of the ship, but no sign of Captain Donner was ever found. He had simply vanished from a locked room in the middle of the lake. In October 1987, a very similar incident occurred. Captain Frederick Helling told his crew he would be heading to his quarters at 2A and requested they wake him at 8 a.m. When the crew went to wake him, the captain was nowhere to be found. The Coast Guard searched 900 square miles of the lake, but found no sign of the man. The FBI even got involved, interviewing everyone on the ship under the suspicion of foul play, but they found no leads. The captain was just gone. But it's not just people on the water who have suffered unusual disappearances. There is the haunting story of Stephen Kubacki. In February 1978, Kubacki, a student at a nearby institution, vanished while on a brief cross-country skiing trip around Lake Michigan. He was an avid outdoorsman who had climbed mountains in Europe, yet he never returned from this simple excursion. Searchers found a line of footprints in the snow, stretching roughly 200 yards, tracing his path directly to the lake's edge. And then, without further sign or trace, the trail just ended. Authorities concluded he must have fallen through the ice, despite finding no evidence of a break. Then on May 5th, 1979, more than 14 months after he vanished, Kubacki woke up in a field in Pottsville, Massachusetts, 700 miles east of where his footprints ended. He had no memory of the missing 14 and a half months. He was wearing clothes he didn't recognize and carrying a backpack with maps for places like San Francisco, Reno, and Chicago. He even had a t-shirt from a marathon. His memory was intact right up until his last moments on the lake's edge, where he remembered feeling cold and afraid as the frozen darkness closed in. To this day, the gap in his life remains a total blank. Next, in the 1990s, an utterly bizarre event occurred just outside St. Joseph, Michigan. Several sailors reported interacting not only with the ghost ships themselves, but more disturbingly, with the crews on board. A small group of weekend sailors had taken their sailboat out for what should have been a routine afternoon trip. But the lake is an unforgiving place to sail, especially when the weather shifts without warning. They were caught off guard when a massive fog bank rolled into the area, dropping their visibility to nearly zero. To make matters worse, their engines suddenly conked out, leaving them drifting helplessly in the white void. The group quickly jumped on the radio to call the Coast Guard for help, but for some reason no response appeared to be coming through. The silence of the fog was deafening, and their concern quickly turned to genuine fear. Then rescue seemingly came out of the thick mist. A second sailboat came into view, pulling up alongside them. The crew of this second ship quickly took the group on board and attached a tow line to their disabled vessel, with the clear intention of taking them back to the safety of St. Joseph. As they progressed through the fog, the crew of the second ship spoke to the friends about the dangers of the lake, recounting how so many people had been caught out by unexpected weather changes over the years. They told them how lucky they were to have been found before anything tragic happened. But then the behavior of these rescuers turned strange. Just before they reached the harbor of St. Joseph, they instructed the group of friends to get back onto their own ship. They disconnected the tow line and without another word, disappeared back into the fog. The friends were perplexed. They were close to the port now, but as they shouted out to thank the other ship, the crew totally ignored them. Suddenly, the official Coast Guard arrived. They had been searching for the group in the fog for hours, having received their distress call, though the group's radio hadn't allowed them to hear the Coast Guard's responses. The Coast Guard towed them the rest of the way to the Saint Joseph Port. Relieved to be on dry land, the two couples asked about the other ship that had saved them. The Coast Guard was confused. They had been tracking the group's boat on radar within a 24-mile radius, and at no point was there ever another vessel near them. It was only when they shared the story with local sailors that a chilling detail emerged. The description of the boat that had rescued them sounded exactly like a vessel that had been lost at sea 10 years prior. A rescue from the past, by a crew that should have been dead. It is not just the waters themselves that seem to be teeming with ghost stories. The communities and structures that surround Lake Michigan are filled with countless supernatural goings-on. Lake Michigan is home to over 100 lighthouses, and as the saying goes, it is said that every lighthouse has a ghost story. Among these, the Big Bay Point Lighthouse, often associated with the haunting of Captain Townsend, stands as one of the most widely documented haunted towers. Captain Townsend was a man born in Crystal before becoming a dedicated lighthouse keeper. He apparently died in painful circumstances, though clarity on the exact nature of his end remains elusive. The Historical Society, which now cares for the lighthouse, believes it is home to not just one but 5 different spirits. Paranormal activity first began to be reported in 1988 during a restoration project. Inmates from a local prison were tasked with helping restore the lighthouse to its former glory, but many quickly refused to work in the upstairs areas alone, claiming they felt a heavy, terrifying presence watching them. Months later, a carpenter working alone heard the distinct sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway behind him. He went to investigate, but found the building entirely empty. When he returned to his work, the footsteps started again, this time heading toward the staircase and beginning to walk down them. From his vantage point, the carpenter had a clear view of the stairs, yet as the sounds of heavy boots descended, the staircase remained totally empty. He grabbed his tools and left, refusing to ever return. Since then, hundreds of reports have surfaced, faces forming in mirrors, the smell of cigar smoke appearing out of nowhere, and the apparition of a woman looking down at the waters from the window. In 1997, a documentary crew even witnessed items moving on their own, including cutlery being placed in a formal setting at a table when no one was around. The hauntings extend to the islands as well. Over on Chambers Island, a lighthouse keeper named Joel Blahnik reported a recurring encounter that lasted from 1976 until 1986. Every year, on his first night back at the lighthouse for the spring season, he would be awoken by the sound of footsteps loudly thudding down the steps. He would hear them march all the way to the bottom, followed by the eerie sound of the back door latch clicking open as if someone or something was leaving after having kept watch over the light for the winter. In later years, visitors reported items going missing and turning up in impossible places. The legends of Chambers Island became so famous that once, when a group of nuns visited and heard the ghost stories, one sister was so affected, she began to pray for the spirit's peace. Remarkably, No reports of paranormal activity have been made at that site since that day in 1987. Perhaps the most tragic tale comes from St. Martin Island. The story goes that the ghost of the lighthouse, there is a former keeper who suffered an unimaginable loss. His children attended school on nearby Washington Island and would travel by boat each day. But one day, the boat didn't make it back. All his children were lost at sea. The distraught keeper searched the shoreline for days, waving a green lantern in the desperate hope of finding them. Years later, a schooner was traveling through the area when the lighthouse light unexpectedly went out. Terrified of hitting the hazardous rocks, the crew was relieved to see a green lantern being held up on the shore, providing just enough light to guide them. They followed the light as it bobbed along the coast, assuming someone was leading them to safety. Eventually, the light vanished, but it led them directly to the open door of the lighthouse keeper's hut. When the sailors walked inside, they found the green lantern sitting on a table. Next to it lay the frozen dead body of the lighthouse keeper. He had fulfilled his duty even in death, guiding sailors home with the same light he once used to search for his lost children. These stories remind us that the horrifying legends of Lake Michigan are not just about monsters or machines. They are about the human spirits tethered to these shores by duty, tragedy, and a refusal to let go. Whether it is a ghost ship pulling a stranded boat to safety or a dead keeper waving a lantern, the past refuses to stay buried beneath the waves. But even the sky over Lake Michigan isn't safe. Numerous aircraft have gone dark while flying over these waters. Some have been found as mangled wreckage, while others simply seem to drop off the face of the earth. The most haunting of these incidents is the fate of Flight 2501. The year was 1950. A DC-4 airplane was flying over Battle Creek, Michigan, a little before midnight on June 23rd. On board were 3 crew members and 55 passengers. Cruising at an altitude of 3,500 feet, the captain was acutely aware of the thunderstorms raging over the lake, adjusting his flight plan to avoid the worst of the turbulence. Around 20 minutes later, the captain contacted air traffic control, requesting to drop to 2,500 feet. Due to other aircraft in the area, his request was denied. Whatever happened next happened with terrifying speed. Numerous witnesses on the ground reported seeing a sudden, blinding flash of light in the sky around this time. Flight 2501 was never heard from again. In the days that followed, small fragments of the plane's wreckage began to wash up on the shores near St. Joseph, along with remains of the people on board. But it was noted with grim detail that these were all very small parts. Many of the remains were eventually buried in unofficial, unmarked graves around St. Joseph. The full wreckage of the plane was never located, and the cause of the accident, which at the time was the worst commercial airline disaster in American history, remains an unsolved mystery. As the Coast Guard began their initial search at 2 a.m. on June 24th, 2 policemen reported seeing an odd red light hovering over the lake before it vanished into the dark of the night sky. They were not alone. Countless stories of strange flying objects have been reported over the lake throughout the years, from falling fireballs to flying discs. But before we delve into the most famous of these sightings, there is another strange phenomenon within the lake. that some suggest may be connected. For a number of years around the turn of the 20th century, numerous people reported that the water of Lake Michigan would appear to be boiling. A newspaper article from 1899 reported that in June of that year, a patch of water near Grand Traverse Bay was seen boiling violently before a great geyser of water bolted upward to the sky, eventually falling back down as the water returned to a calm lap. In 1902, a fisherman drowned in the area, and many locals claimed he had fallen victim to this boiling water. This phenomenon was reported on and off until 1917. That year, a Navy ship came into port. When a local reporter asked why they were there, the captain was evasive. Sensing something strange, reporters kept an eye on the ship that night. It was anchored at the exact spot of the boiling water reports. 2 divers were spotted jumping into the sea in the middle of the night while the deck bustled with activity. They were only in the water a short while before returning to the ship, which quickly left. After that night, the boiling water was never reported again. The mystery of the lake and the sky converged once more on March 4th, 1994. It was a clear night in Grand Haven, Michigan. Around 9 p.m., Cindy Prada was sitting on the phone in her kitchen when a light coming through her window caught her attention. It was so bright she thought it was a full moon. When she looked out, she saw 4 lights in a straight line, hovering just above the tree line. One light glided away before zipping back into formation. Another moved away and disappeared in a flash. The lights were so brilliant they penetrated her home, yet they made no sound. Her horse, standing just below them, remained calm as if nothing was happening. Further south in Holland, the Graves family experienced the same terror. 14-year-old Joey Graves was awoken by a bright light coming through the windows. His mother, Holly Graves, was awoken by the sound of her son screaming for them to come into the living room. When she arrived, she said it was like a spotlight was being shined on their home. Holly called 911, and she and her husband, Daryl, went outside. They saw a cylinder-shaped object made of what looked like chrome, silently gliding across the sky like a blimp. It had no windows, but a circle of flickering lights on its bottom. At 9:43 p.m., Mom! Officer Jerry Velthouse arrived on the scene. A man who didn't believe in UFOs. He expected a prank or a fire. Instead, he saw 2 lights, flashing from white to green. One light quickly peeled off at an incredible speed. Suddenly, the remaining light split into 5 different lights, all shooting off in different directions. As he tracked them in his car, more and more reports from concerned citizens flooded his radio. The police contacted Jack Bashong, the radar operator at the Muskegon National Weather Station. Initially skeptical, Jack looked at his radar and saw something he couldn't explain. A large object was moving at 6,000 feet, traveling 100 miles per hour, then jumping to 12,000 feet in an instant. He began to notice multiple objects forming a triangular pattern. The object to the north would jump 20 miles and hover. Then the 2 lower objects would copy the movement. Jack watched dozens of these objects heading to the same location over the northernmost part of the lake that wasn't covered by ice. They appeared to move up and down by thousands of feet in seconds until, at 2 a.m., they all vanished. The sighting was a mass event, with over 300 witnesses across 42 Michigan counties. But the most terrifying report came from a young couple camping by the lake that same night. The wife was awoken by the sound of rushing water. She stepped out of her tent to see a large light hovering in the sky far out over the lake. Underneath the light, there appeared to be a 20-foot wide waterfall. But the water wasn't falling. It was traveling upward, being sucked into the light. We are forced to confront a chilling question. Why does such a staggering concentration of high strangeness occur right here on these specific waters? Is it merely a cruel geographical coincidence? Or is there a hidden physical anchor buried beneath the waves that binds these mysteries together? Perhaps the answer lies not in the sky or the storms, but in the very foundation of the lake itself. Because in 2007, a discovery was made that changed our understanding of Lake Michigan forever. Underwater archaeologist Dr. Mark Hawley and his team discovered a series of rocks deep beneath the lake's surface that appeared to have been deliberately placed there. These stones, arranged in a mile-long stretch along the lake bed, were found to be approximately 9,000 years old. Despite what many sensationalist sources claim, these are not standing stones like Stonehenge. They are a long, deliberate line of smaller stones. However, the significance of their location is undeniable. This ancient formation lies submerged within Grand Traverse Bay, the very same location where witnesses reported the terrifying boiling water and erupting geysers over a century ago. Why were these stones placed there 9 millennia ago? Was this site chosen because of the strange phenomena that still plague the area today? Or did the placement of these stones somehow anchor the energy that leads to such high strangeness? The connection between these ancient relics and modern sightings of UFOs and phantom ships forces us to reconsider the nature of the lake itself. It is hard not to raise your eyebrows when you realize that the spot where the Navy sent divers in the middle of the night in 1917 is the same spot where a prehistoric civilization left their mark. Ichiket. These stones are the silent witnesses to every disaster and every miracle that has occurred on Lake Michigan. They remind us that before the first schooner set sail and before the first airplane crossed the sky, the lake was already a place of deep, dark, and enduring secrets. Finally, before we conclude today's message, thank you for journeying through these shadows with me. From the 1875 mystery of the Rosabel to the 1994 mass UFO sighting, Lake Michigan remains a gateway of the unexplained. If you carry a personal story of these maritime tragedies or a legend from your own shores, please share it with us in the comments. Your voice adds to this growing library of the unknown. If this journey moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to follow our next expedition. Until we meet again in our next entry, I am Maritime Lore. Pleasant dreams.